Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Just in Time Cafe. I am Elizabeth Swan, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe, and I am going to be your moderator today. And if you've never been to the cafe before, you are in for a treat. And I'm very excited about today's webinar, Causal Reasoning, Lean Special Sauce for Root Cause Analysis, with guest host, my friend, Peter Cullen, who's continuous improvement lead and master black belt for Shell Global Mobility, which is like the customer facing bits, the gas stations, the food courts, shops, things like that. And welcome, Peter.
Hello.
Hello. Peter has been, we were just discussing this because I've known Peter for more than 25 years. I knew Peter back at Starwood Hotels and Resorts, where he was also a master black belt, but he's been master black belt improvement leader across many industry sectors, based in Scotland, 5 miles from the village where Outlander was filmed. I'm not sure how many Outlander fans we have out there, but I'm impressed. He's been with Shell for 14 years, covering everything from drilling wells to paying invoices. Currently, he heads up the continuous improvement program across all the customer-facing bits of Shell, and married to the lovely Lori with 3 teenage daughters. Well, that's 3 projects right there that you are in charge of. So great to have you, Peter. And a few housekeeping items. Everyone out there, you guys can ask questions anytime. Put them into the chat area. I'll be watching the chat. Peter's also probably going to watch the chat, but he's got other stuff on his mind. So we'll both be mindful. There's also a question area. If I see anything there, I'll keep my eye out for it. But chat, I'm definitely going to see. If you're interested in a recording of this webinar, we will have that available by Monday. We make all our webinars available. You can go and see everything that's happened in the past. And so you are already engaging in our first activity, which is telling us where you're from. So I'm always curious, how international we are, which today we're international by virtue of Peter from Scotland. But let's see, we've got Arizona, Nevada, Washington, California, Texas, Missouri, Ann Arbor. Karen, she's in Rhode Island, right around the corner from me. Love the East Coast. We are in the minority, Karen. I do not know why. San Diego is rocking it. And let's see, Waterford, Missouri, Denver, Miami, Kansas City, and Florida. Hey, another East Coaster. New Hampshire, Sarasota, Portland, Saskatchewan. Thank you, Janet. We are got 2 countries going on here with Canada and Steve in Louisiana. Awesome. Okay. So what I'd like to do is give you guys a little taste before Peter gets rolling of what's coming up at the cafe. And first up, next month's webinar is called Walking Backwards. Does your leader standard work support your goals? This will be with Chad Breither. Bareither. He told me how to pronounce it. I'm going to get it. And he just wrote a new book called Improve Less, the Focus and Align Framework for Sustainable Continuous Improvement. So he's got a lot about doing less to get more done. So I'm going to give you guys a link to that in the chat. The other thing we've got going on is the current podcast with the fabulous Rich Sheridan. And this one, he actually gave us a little mini tour of Menlo Innovations. If you've never been on a Menlo Innovations tour, they're a treat, and he's hilarious and fascinating. And it's a company that does what I call lean incognito, amazing visual workplace. And since COVID, they have just continued to have their best years ever, and he will explain why. And then the other great thing is our first workshop. We've got Mike Osterling coming back. If any of you saw him in his recent webinar, he's now doing a 3.5-hour workshop on Tuesday. There are still a few spots left. If you guys want to join us, Mike is amazing. He wrote a book, or co-wrote value stream mapping. And he's just an incredible facilitator. So I highly recommend that one. I just put the link in the chat. So that is all about the cafe. Now we want to hear from Peter, our excellent guest host. Take it away, Peter.
Hello. So just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay.
Two thumbs.
Yep, all good. All good. Excellent. Right. Welcome to the next sort of 40 minutes or so, and we're going to take you through this thing called causal reasoning. The material I'm going to take you through is basically one of the introductory courses that we run at Shell to introduce this subject to people, with a few embellishments of my own, especially for this evening. So first of all, let's just have a quick look at what we're going to run through. I'm going to start off with a bit of a conversation about why this is even necessary. So we're all familiar with fishbone diagrams and 5 whys and all that sort of thing. So why do we really need something else on top of that? By the time we get to the piece of what causal reasoning really is, I think I certainly hope that question will answer itself. Because we'll talk through some of the sort of shortcomings of those particular techniques, where they go wrong. And I can say from my own personal experience that causal reasoning, once you see it, once you hear it, you can't unsee it. It is truly a bit of a game changer, I think. So hopefully you get out of this session as much as I did when I first learned about it. We're going to have a quick chat about Isaac Newton. Hopefully you guys can remember some of your sort of high school physics. We're going to look at Isaac Newton's first law of motion, and it will become clear as to why we're going to do that when we get to that point. There's essentially sort of 2 key reasons why the normal techniques of root cause analysis aren't actually that robust, not actually that strong. So between those 2 sort of clouds in the middle, we'll cover those 2 main reasons. And then we'll just add a little bit more sophistication to it at the end, before I take you through sort of how to practically do this and how to build up what's called a causal tree. Okay. So first things first, why do we need this? Well, we're all familiar with Ishikawas and fishbones and 5 whys and so on. And the question, why do we need another way, is, to put it bluntly, these techniques aren't really that good. The fishbone diagram at its absolute heart is nothing more than a brainstorming tool, to sort of channel your brainstorming into particular places and avenues. And what you end up brainstorming isn't necessarily causes. Might sound strange, but we'll cover that when we get there. And then the way that we traditionally teach sort of 5 whys is, there's some great examples out there, and the one of the Jefferson Memorial, I would imagine some of you have heard. The root cause of why railway tracks are 4 foot 8.5 inches wide is another one that's fairly well known. But the way we teach 5 whys, it's almost a bit too simplistic. Okay. And we'll talk about why that oversimplification actually is quite a limiting factor later on as well. Okay. So if you cast your mind back to the last time you did something like a fishbone diagram, you probably came up with things like this as being your root causes. Okay. I'm sure most of these root causes will sound familiar to a lot of people on the phone. So things like people were not trained properly, the control didn't work, it's not automated, we don't have enough staff, the machine hadn't been maintained. Okay. So through that normal thought process of brainstorming what we think is causing a problem, that's typically the sorts of things you get. Okay. That's basically the same as saying that this situation caused a fire. All right. And I'm sure you're probably looking at those pictures on the screen thinking, well, don't be ridiculous. Of course, those things can't cause a fire. But we've just said that the fact that there isn't an SOP has caused this problem. Or we've just said that the fact that the control didn't work or the automation wasn't there could cause that problem. And it's exactly the same. You would never blame the lack of a fire extinguisher on the fact that there's a fire and what caused a fire. What causes a fire is something setting light to something that's flammable in an oxygen-rich environment. That's the only thing that causes a fire, not an extinguisher missing. Yeah. But it's worth noting that that sort of lack of thinking, or the thought process of such and such a thing wasn't there, is a very natural place to go. Yeah. And that's almost exactly why we need a very structured and very methodical approach to doing it differently, because we have this thing in our human nature called defensive reasoning. And defensive reasoning is looking at a situation, looking back with the benefit of hindsight at a situation, and effectively thinking of all the things that went wrong, all the things that were missed, all the things that people should have done but didn't do, and so on. Okay. So if you're in a situation where somebody's maybe had something sort of in their eye or been injured some way, then it's perfectly normal and perfectly reasonable for somebody to say that the cause of that was that they didn't have their safety glasses on. Okay, fair enough. It may have stopped the person getting injured. It may have, limited or reduced the unintended consequences or the injury that person had, but it's not what caused it. Okay. And this is why it's quite a difficult thing to get to, because our human tendency, our human nature is to go straight to this defensive reasoning. And it's not a bad thing. It's kept us alive for millions of years and kept us evolving since we were all cavemen. It's not a bad thing, but when you're looking for true root cause, it's actually quite often sort of sends us off in the wrong direction. Because if you think about this quite literally, what would be the solution from this point? So if the root cause is he wasn't wearing his safety glasses, the only real solution to that is to get him to wear safety glasses, which means buying lots of safety glasses, handing them out, and then supervising and reinforcing the fact that people wear them. Now, that's not in itself a very easy, cheap, effective, or foolproof way of preventing something from happening. Okay. So this defensive thought process that we have can very easily sort of send us down the wrong direction, right? The other aspect of this defensive reasoning is that it's very rarely the full picture. So if we state that the root cause of something is there was no standard operating procedure, then I can jump on my laptop here, or I can quickly write one up on Microsoft Word, I can print it out and I can hand it to you. You can no longer say there isn't one, because there is. You've got it in your hand. Has that solved your problem? Absolutely not. Okay, that was never the full picture. So this defensive reasoning tends to make us jump straight to these causes that we think are causing the situation. But in actual fact, when you say that the lack of something or the absence of something is causing your problem, what you're really saying is, if that thing had have been there, the problem wouldn't have happened. So if you just flip the language around, what you're essentially saying is, when you blame the lack of something, if that thing had been there, then you wouldn't have had the problem. So what you've actually thought of is not a cause, but a solution. It's a solution dressed up as a cause, because you've talked about the absence of something. You've basically said, if that thing was here, if that thing had been present, we wouldn't have had the problem. So that defensive reasoning tends to give you solutions dressed up as problems rather than dressed up as causes rather than actual causes. So if we take this worked example on the screen just a step further, we've got this this poor gentleman, James, who's had some caustic chemicals squirted in his eye. Well, we can look at what actually caused that. Well, there was caustic chemicals in a pipe running through a gasket, and as James walked past, the gasket failed and it sprayed in his face. Okay, that's what actually caused that problem. Yeah. So in essence, what we've got to do, and this is an incredibly difficult thing to do to begin with, it really is quite tricky to get here, because we are programmed as human beings to identify the things that weren't there, the things that were missed. Okay, so very common, very typical conversation you'll hear is, why are we not hitting the KPI? Well, because we're not following the standard operating procedure. Things like this. We're very good at talking about what doesn't happen. We're very good at talking about what wasn't there. And what we need to do is really challenge ourselves to start talking about what was there, what did happen. And it sounds so obvious, but it's incredibly difficult to do. And you'll catch yourself doing it from after this session this evening or today. As you go through your daily lives for the weeks to come, you'll find yourself and notice other people talking all the time in terms of what wasn't there or what didn't happen. It's incredibly difficult to actually talk in terms of what did happen and what did exist. Okay, and it's a real challenge to do that. So the key thing here is that something not happening cannot cause something else to happen. The absence of one thing cannot physically cause something else to happen, right? And that's really where Mr. Newton comes in, because his first law of motion was this law of inertia. And what it states is that unless you have an external force acting on something, that thing will carry on doing whatever it's already doing. So if there's a football on the floor, stationary, it will stay stationary until someone kicks it, or until a gust of wind blows it along, or until gravity makes it roll down a slope. But on its own, nothing happens. Okay? So that law of physics applies here in exactly the same way, because unless something causes something else to happen, nothing happens. That maybe sounds a little bit sort of ethereal, but just go with me on this. So imagine this example of a car door. So this car door is open. Why is it open? It's open because somebody opened it. And now that it's open, it will stay open until somebody shuts it, or until a gust of wind blows it closed. Okay? And that's a really important principle, because you have to take forward this idea that unless something actively causes something else to happen, nothing happens. Things that don't happen don't cause anything. So our lack of training, our lack of control, our lack of supervision, our SOP that wasn't there, our control that didn't work, did not in themselves cause anything. Okay, and that's the challenge with causal reasoning. We all have to turn our thought process round from what didn't happen and what wasn't there to what did happen and what was there. And that's a really, really tricky thing to do. But have enough practice and catch yourself on it enough times, and it does begin to work. Trust me, but it is incredibly difficult to actually make that flip, because it just goes against everything that we have within our human nature. Okay. So causal reasoning is about this thing that looks at what did happen, what was the particular recipe or the particular mixture of what we call conditions and actions that existed that caused something to happen. all right? And it's identifying what those conditions were. It's identifying what those actions were that caused something to happen, all right? So let's just have a quick word about what we call actions and conditions. So actually, I meant to bring an apple in with me, but I forgot, and it's through in the kitchen. But we can do it with a pen instead. Okay. So if I hold this pen and I drop it, why did that drop? Anyone?
I'm going gravity.
Gravity. Okay. All right. So gravity is the reason that dropped. Okay. All right. I'm holding it. I'm still surrounded by gravity, but it's not dropping. So can't be gravity. So what is it?
You've got folks saying you let go of it. You moved your fingers apart.
Right. So we have two things that need to happen for this pen to fall, or for the apple to fall. Okay. It's not just a one thing. So we talk about the root cause. There's no such thing. You always need a blend of, or a combination of, what we call actions and conditions. So in that situation, the condition is I'm surrounded by gravity, and the action is I move my fingers apart. And it's the combination of those two things that lead to the thing happening. Okay. Just like our fire example. So here we've got source of ignition, we've got flammable material, and we've got oxygen. So which one of these is a condition and which one of these is an action, do you think? Elizabeth?
Sorry, had to pull myself off mute. All right, a condition, I'm going to say, is oxygen.
Yep.
And then the source of the ignition might be the action. Perfect.
So it's fairly intuitive what the actions and conditions are. So a condition is an ongoing situation that exists, and then an action is a momentary thing that happens within that environment or within that condition. So the fact that I'm in a room here that has oxygen in it is a condition. The fact that I'm surrounded by wooden furniture and a wooden floor and so on is a condition. It's flammable material. The thing that momentarily makes it all come to life is when I strike a match or strike my lighter or something. So you've got an action, the source of the ignition, that happens within the environment of a couple of conditions that need to be present. All right. Another simple example. So I went outside, I got wet. So we are actually facing I'm talking to you from Scotland, in the UK, we are facing a red weather warning this evening. Some massive storm is coming in off the North Sea, and they're saying we're going to be, there's even danger to life. We're expecting lots of disruption to travel and so on. So if I go outside, I'm going to get wet. So the action is me going outside. The condition is it's raining. Now, the critical thing here is that you only need to take away one of those things. So if I go outside and I've managed to take away the condition, then I'm not going to get wet. If I go outside when it's not raining, everything's fine. By the same token, if it is raining outside and I stay indoors, again, there's no problem. I'm not going to get wet. It's only the combination of those two things that means I get wet. So if we think of why we're doing root cause analysis in the first place, we're only ever doing it so that we can put in some kind of preventative measure. And in order to prevent something happening, all you need to do is you need to take away one of those actions or one of those conditions. So if you think about that from the fire example, If you take away the oxygen, you don't get a fire. If you take away all the flammable material, you don't get a fire. And if you somehow eliminate all sources of ignition, you don't have a fire. You only need to remove one of them to make the whole thing preventative, right? And that gives you so many more options than if you just go straight down this defensive line and come up with a lack of SOP or a lack of automation. The only way to combat a lack of automation is to automate it. But if you go down the path of working out causally what had caused something, you probably leave your options so much more open in terms of how many different things you could do to prevent the problem happening again, right? So I did go outside, I did get wet. You can see that my dog was much more sensible than I was. He managed to stay dry because he stayed inside. So we've got our actions, we've got our conditions, and we've got our what we call sort of negative statements, right? So we want to turn all of these things that weren't available or didn't happen or weren't present, we want to turn them around so that they are positives. Okay, we want to turn those negative statements into positives. Okay, so rather than say something like the person didn't complete the form, well, that can be turned around and say, well, they sent the form back, they submitted the form, but with some of the fields still blank. The machine had not been maintained. Becomes, well, they continue to use it beyond its service date. Or, you know, the systems don't talk to each other. That's certainly one that I hear a lot in Shell. We have numerous systems and they don't talk to each other. Well, okay, fair enough. What actually happens is there's 4 different systems or 3 different systems that are all independent from each other, and only one person, only one of them got updated. So that's what did happen. So you can take that, you can take those, in many cases, you can take those negative statements and you can just flip them around and reword them and they become positive. Okay. And that already is a very sort of straightforward way of describing what did happen, in terms of your ability to go and investigate things. All right. So we'll come back to this point in a little while. All right. But for causal reasoning, to work properly, you need to be able to go and see things. You need to be able to go and investigate things and so on. Right. So I know Just in Time Cafe have done a couple of things in the past around going to the Gemba, and that begins to become an absolutely critical skill in causal reasoning, because your ability to go and investigate what happened and how it happened and why it happened becomes absolutely critical. And again, if you think about this in terms of those negative statements, think about a cause. A typical cause might be that someone wasn't supervised properly, right? Imagine going to the Gemba and imagine trying to watch that happen. I'm going to go and I'm going to stand behind your desk and I'm going to watch you not supervise someone. You can't do it. Yeah, automatically, if you think of it in those terms, you just can't do it. So if you come up with a statement and imagine yourself going to the Gemba to investigate it and to observe it directly, and if you think to yourself, well, I couldn't actually do that, then you've probably come up with a defensive statement. Okay. So is turning your negative statements into positive statements enough? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. Okay. Because what happens here is people come up with ever more fascinating ways of saying no without actually saying no. People come up with ever more inventive ways of, or ever more weird and wonderful words to use instead of lack of. Okay. So you could say something like, instead of the people hadn't been trained, you could say they were incompetent. So you've taken the word not out and you've used a different word, and so on. Okay. But that in itself is not enough, right? And here's why. Has anybody on the call been the driver of a car when you've had an accident?
Yes.
Yes.
You're
You
getting some
talking?
yeses.
Yeah. Okay. I need to actually just quickly talk to somebody who was the driver of a car when they had the accident. Elizabeth, have you had an accident in a car?
I have had an accident in a car.
And were you the driver?
I was the driver.
Okay, right, perfect. Well, hopefully you weren't injured or in other way, in any other way to inconvenience by this crash. But in the moments after the crash, how did you feel?
Stupid.
Stupid.
Yes.
Right. Hopefully not too hurt. Hopefully no pain or anything. Okay, but pretty daft. Okay. In the moments just before the crash, how were you feeling?
Confident.
Confident?
Mm-hmm.
Doing anything different to normal?
Yes. Probably.
All right.
Slightly. Yeah.
Were you doing whatever it was you were doing that was slightly abnormal, thinking this is rather risky, this is not very safe?
Not really.
Okay. So everything you were doing at that time, in the moments before the crash, made perfect sense to you, did it?
Yes.
Cool. Perfect. That's exactly the answer I was hoping for, because that's exactly what happens. So what changes someone's view of an incident is the incident itself. Okay. So if we look back in time at an incident, you almost cannot do that without the benefit of hindsight. It's almost impossible to switch off hindsight. So if you look back at an incident or something that went wrong and you think of it in those terms, you automatically think of all the things that went wrong, all the things. None of that's actually wrong. That's all hindsight. You can only say those things afterwards, okay? Because as Elizabeth just said, in the moments before the crash, everything was fine. You were driving along, you were doing everything perfectly normally, it was a nice day, you were driving the way you would normally drive, and then something happened, okay? So the key here, and this is why just turning the negative statements positive isn't enough. What we really need to do is we need to lift ourselves out of our bodies and project ourselves back in time and imagine ourselves in the shoes of that person in the moments before the thing happened, whatever the thing is, okay, before the problem occurred, right? What did the world look like to that person at that time? What were the conditions that existed? What had they been asked to do? What was the environmental setting and scenario that they were in? Okay. Because the one thing you can, and one of the things you find with this sort of this hindsight negatives, this sort of hindsight view, is even though it's a positive statement, even though you're not using not, you're not using lack of, and so on, even though it's a positive statement, you get things like, oh, that person made a mistake, right? Now you can only say that they made a mistake after the mistake has been made. If you put yourself back in time, back to before the incident happened. Imagine yourself in the shoes of that person, working your way towards that incident or towards that problem happening, and you look at it from that point of view. Very rarely, in fact, never, does anybody knowingly make a mistake. Nobody comes to work to do a bad job. Nobody comes to work to deliberately get things wrong. In that scenario, surrounded by those conditions, that person did what they think was the right thing to do at that time. And it's only later, when you look back at it, can you say it was a mistake, right? So this is why the causal reasoning piece becomes so powerful and so insightful, is because you change your whole perspective on how you look at that problem and how you look at what caused that problem. If you transport yourself back in time, imagine yourself being that person working towards that incident and imagining all the things that they went through and what the world looked like to them, you begin to usually realize very quickly that any mistakes, you would have probably made the same mistake, and everybody on this call would have probably made the same mistake. Yeah. So one of the very positive side effects of doing causal reasoning is that you tend to remove the blame away from people. When you're doing defensive reasoning, when you're doing defensive investigations, you tend to zone in on the people and what somebody missed, what somebody didn't do that they should have done. Okay. When you look at it causally, you realize that people make entirely reasonable decisions when in that moment surrounded by those things. And what only turned out later to be a mistake, when you look at it causally, is entirely understandable. And you begin to pick up on these things, and this gives you so many opportunities to then, like I say, put in place something preventative, take out one of those conditions, take out one of those actions, and you've stopped the whole thing from ever happening again. Okay. So I'm going to take you through a little real life example of how this all works, and hopefully this will make it bring to life. I realize everything we've talked about so far is kind of a bit mind-bending and might sound a bit strange, but we'll work through this example, and this will take you through, encapsulate all the things that we've talked about so far, and also take you through the sort of practicalities of how to do or at least how to begin one of these causal studies. Okay, so the real life situation is this. We were on one of our gas plants, and there was a fire, and what had happened is that an engineer had been sent out to remove a piece of corroded pipework, and they'd accidentally cut into a piece of pipework that had gasoline running through it. Okay, and this cutting operation was being an acetylene torch. Not surprisingly, acetylene torch plus gasoline, equals fire. So we wanted to find out. We want to do a full causal investigation of why this happened. So just to give you a bit of context, this is the setting. Again, massively important to go to the Gemba and actually see the environment in which all of this is happening, because unless you see the environment in which it's happening, you won't fully understand why the person who made the decisions they made, and you won't fully understand how the mistake was made. Okay. So what we've got here is clearly a whole bunch of pipework, and this piece here is what we call a fire enclosure. All right. So if we're using acetylene torches and doing what we call hot work, we have this sort of like a scaffolding thing around it, draped with thick fire retardant canvas to stop any sparks flying around, stop any debris, and so on. Okay, so this is what we call a fire enclosure. To give you a sense of it, that height of it is probably about 6 foot. So once you're inside it, you can't see out. you're pretty much sort of just, you've got the canvas around you and so on. All right. Here we have, so here is the pipe that has the hole cut in it. You can just see the hole there. Here is the water pipe that was supposed to be being cut. It was the water pipe that was supposed to be being cut and replaced. And this pipe here is the gasoline pipe, the one above it. Okay. So that's the scenario. And we want to do a bit of a causal investigation into why that happened. All right. So we start off at the top of this. We're going to gradually sort of work down layer by layer, building up this rich picture of actions and conditions, layer by layer, of what caused what. All right. So at the top, we have the specific example of this fire in the pipe rack on the 2nd of February 2023. What caused that? Well, gasoline had escaped into the open air, which is a condition, and the action was that the torch ignited it. Right. So the torch on its own, not a problem. The gasoline on its own, not a problem. Bring the two together, you get a fire. Okay, so that's your actions and conditions beginning to work. We want to take this one on the left here and take it to another level, right? So we want to ask, well, why was the gasoline in the open air? Okay, well, the gasoline was in the open air because the pipe had been cut and the pipe contained gasoline. Cutting the pipe that didn't have gasoline in wouldn't have been a problem. And the gasoline being in the pipe that hadn't been cut wouldn't be a problem. But again, put the two together and you have gasoline in the open air, which then becomes a problem. Okay. So we've got the other side as well. We'll just concentrate on this left side for the sake of timing, but just so you understand that you build each of the branches down gradually and methodically. Okay. So we're going to follow down this sort of left-hand side. Why was the gasoline out in the open air? Well, the pipe contained the gasoline, and the pipe containing the gasoline was cut by the engineer. Right. Now we could go and investigate why the pipe had gasoline in, but probably would just a bit of a dead end, probably, because you'd just be like, well, it did. But we want to find out, why did the engineer cut into the pipe that had the gasoline in, right? Well, he'd been instructed to cut the water pipe, and he believed that the gasoline pipe was the water pipe. Interesting, right? Notice the language. We have not said he made a mistake. We have not said he cut the wrong pipe. That would be subjective. That would be judgmental. We have only stated facts. Okay. So the engineer was instructed to cut the water pipe, hence the reason he was using an acetylene torch. He thought that the gasoline pipe was the water pipe. Let's follow that. Why on earth did he think the gasoline pipe was the water pipe? Well, all the pipes from within that fire enclosure, all he could see were two completely identical pipes. Okay. One of the pipes had a supporting sling on it. I don't know if you remember that from the photograph, but there was a sling wrapped around one of them, and it was lifted up. Okay. Now, do those two things, does that action and that condition, do those two things together answer why he cut into the gas, why he believed the gasoline pipe was the water pipe? Is that enough of an explanation?
Susan says no.
No, it's not. Well done, Susan.
Well
Okay.
done, Susan.
Well done, Susan. There's another piece of information here that's needed, and this is important when in the sort of building of the tree, because the layer below a particular statement has to be enough to explain why the statement above it happened. Okay. So all the pipes looked identical. There was a supporting sling around one of them. Why would that lead the engineer to believe that was the water pipe. Well, we've actually got another piece of information here. It's entirely common practice amongst the engineering fraternity, if you're going to cut a pipe that's horizontal, if you're going to cut a horizontal pipe, you put a supporting sling around to support it once the cut goes through. Otherwise, it's just going to fall under gravity. So you hold it up with a sling before you make the cut. So it's entirely common practice for the pipe to be cut to be the one with the sling around it. Well, that completely changes the picture, because now we've got two identical pipes. One of them's got a sling around it. So if you're the engineer walking in there, you immediately think that that's the one to be cut, because why would it be anything else, right? So that the joining up of those conditions and that action very easily explains why the engineer believed that the top pipe was the water pipe and the one underneath it was the gasoline pipe, the one to be left alone. So you've managed to get all the way down to this point without ever using the word wrong, without ever using the word mistake, without ever using anything that would blame the person. And I would challenge any of you on this call to walk into that fire enclosure and be faced with those pipes, with that background of support slings and everything, and make a different decision. It becomes completely obvious why the person cut into the wrong pipe. It becomes entirely obvious why that person made a mistake. The point is, he didn't. He didn't make a mistake. He cut the pipe that he thought was the right one, because everything in his training and everything around him told him that was the pipe that needed to be cut. So you quickly begin to understand why these things happen by putting yourself in the position of that person, by looking at this mix of actions and the conditions, the conditions and the actions that were taken within those conditions. You begin to really quickly understand how some of these so-called mistakes happen. So from a preventative point of view, we've now got so many options that we can go down. So one of the conditions is all pipes look identical. Well, how would we get rid of that? That's very easy to get rid of. We could put labels on them. We could paint one pipe green and one pipe red. We could hang things from. We could do a lot of things that would completely eliminate that from being a condition, okay? For instance. And then you've suddenly eliminated your problem, okay? I've got the full version of this tree in real life, and it goes down and down and down. And there's probably about 20 different ways you could have prevented this from happening. From, using different methods of cutting in the first place, to venting the lines, to making the enclosure not quite so high so you can still see around, see over the top of it. Because these pipes, at intervals along them, were marked in terms of what was in them and which pipes were safe and which ones weren't. But the placing of that fire enclosure meant you couldn't see from within it. You couldn't see any of those markings. Okay, so there's probably any number of different ways you could have then solved and prevented this problem. And by methodically working your way down this causal tree, which actions and which conditions explain the box above, and which actions and which conditions explain each of those boxes, and so on. And beginning to really build up this very rich picture of what are all the things that had to come together to cause that thing to go wrong, okay? And then that leaves your doors wide open as to how to prevent it and how to stop it happening again in the future, all right? So that was a very whistle-stop tour of causal reasoning. We've got a few minutes left now to basically sort of take any questions, if anybody has anything they want to go back to and talk about a bit more.
Monica and I suspect a few others, are curious as to what solution was chosen for this one.
So this became a very simple piece of visual management. And one of the gasoline pipes, any pipes that have hydrocarbon in them now are red, and any other pipes are basically left grey.
So they painted them.
Yep.
All right. Visuals.
There you go. Yep.
600 times faster in terms of information. Yes, I agree. Monica, very cool. I agree. Yeah. Oh, Mike is asking any recommendations on how to learn more. And Jennifer McLean's mind is blown. So just so you know.
Wait till you try and do one in real life without any negative statements. You'll need some paracetamol, I tell you. There are a couple of things on YouTube that you could watch. To be honest, to me, there's absolutely no substitute than going and actually trying it. Me talking about it here has hopefully piqued your interest, and I would sort of challenge you all to just go back to day-to-day life. Just pick something very small that has happened that was probably undesirable, and just try to work it through this way. You'll quickly get a sense of how powerful it can be. You'll also quickly get a sense of how difficult it is to get your head around this negative thinking or this defensive thinking and actually into the causal way of thinking. Okay.
Yeah. So two things. Someone earlier on mentioned for conditions and actions using being and doing verbs.
Yep.
I thought that was helpful. And then Shane is asking if you could summarize the steps again.
Right. Okay. So the steps, in terms of building the tree, do you mean?
Is that what you meant, Shane, building the tree? Let's go with that. Building.
Let's go with that.
Yeah,
okay.
with
so, all right. So the key steps are: start with the thing that you're investigating.
Okay.
And the one thing I would say about here, you need to be investigating a specific incident. All right. So when I was working in the finance part of Shell, we used to get a lot of problem statements along the lines of, 93% of our invoices are paid on time. Okay, fine. Well, 93% of invoices is millions and millions of invoices. So it's difficult to apply this thinking to multiple things at once. But if you take one random invoice that was late and you run it through and you work out why it was late, and then you take the next one that was late and you run it through this process, and then do that 4 or 5 times, you'll very quickly start seeing the same things coming up over and over again. But start with a specific incident at the top, and it has to be something that has happened. So we had a great example a couple of weeks ago with someone who tried to apply causal reasoning to an unpaid bill. Well, how can you go and investigate something that hasn't happened? So it has to be something that has happened. It has to be in the positive, should we say? And then layer by layer, line by line, you just start building up this picture of the actions and the conditions that answer why the box above it happened. Okay. So very simply, there was a fire. Why was a fire? Well, we already know the fire triangle from just day-to-day living and from earlier in the presentation. We know we need fuel, we know we need oxygen, and we know we need a source of ignition. Okay, so that's your fire triangle there. So those 3 things together explain why the thing above it happened, right? Next, take each one in turn and say, well, why did that happen? So why was the gasoline in the open air? And then you need actions and conditions. Sometimes there's more than one condition. Sometimes there's 15, 20 conditions and an action, or sometimes there's 10 conditions and a couple of different actions, and so on. So it's not always as simple as it looks on here. But you ask yourself very directly and very sort of answer almost like a toddler would answer it. Why did that happen? Well, why did that pen drop? Well, because you dropped it. It's almost get into that sort of frame of mind of answering the question incredibly immediately. Don't try to overthink it. Don't try to go to the ultimate root cause straight away. Just answer that question and that question alone. Why was the gasoline in the open air? Well, there was gasoline in the pipe and somebody cut into the pipe. That's how there came to be gasoline in the air. You don't need to go any more deeper at that point. You don't need to go any more sophisticated. That is why that happened. And then the next level down. Well, why did the engineer cut into that pipe? Why was it? And you can take each of these down to the next level and answer, why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why was this, a condition? Just gradually be methodical, be systematic about it, and just follow each branch down using actions and conditions until you get to something where you think, right, if I take that out, I've solved it. You don't have to go on forever, but you eventually get to a point where you think, right, well, if I take out that condition, I've solved it. If I stop that action from happening, I've solved it. And that's as far as you need to go. Yeah. So start at the top, be methodical, only talk about facts, only talk about things that are the best sanity check here is, could I go and see it? Could I go and watch this thing happen? If I had had a video camera at the time, would I have seen this thing happen? If the answer is no, be careful. So each one of these statements in each one of these boxes should be factual, should be observable, should be investigatable. Yeah. So again, to stay in that positive angle, to not talk about things that should have happened but didn't, is incredibly difficult. It really is. You find yourself sort of fighting with yourself, wanting to use the word no or not or didn't or. But that's basically the process you go through. And you once you're 2 or 3 layers in, it's probably gone, quite wide, and then you keep going and you keep building and so on. But again, what I would say is you're only ever doing this for the purposes of getting to something that's preventative in the first place. So don't trace it back to the beginnings of time. There's no point. But to go down far enough to be able to identify, that's where it went wrong. This is what I can take out to prevent it, and then you're done. That's the study has served its purpose.
Peter, I don't know if you're seeing the chat is just full of appreciation here, but just to reconfirm, Shane was saying do you need to capture action and conditions each time? And we all agreed the answer was yes, right? You need both of those, the action and conditions. And just there's one more question, so I won't say anything else, but somebody wants to know, Steve wants to know, what brand of guitars do you own? He's a guitarist, but you're getting a lot of appreciation here, so I'm just gonna save the chat.
That's a Gretsch. There's a Gibson. There's a Taylor, Yamaha. There's a few up there.
I so appreciate this. it's really rich. Definitely worth watching again. As someone just mentioned, we'll have this up on Monday. Peter, so great to have you from the fields where Outlander was filmed, and listen to you walk us through this fantastic example. And the thanks are pouring in. Yeah, thanks to everyone for coming. Come again. You'll get an email alerting you now you're on our email list if you weren't before. So you will hear from
Great.
us. All right.
Glad you enjoyed
Take
it.
care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Peter. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.